year. We'll begin with the bracha, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
We thank God for giving us the life-sanctifying opportunity to immerse ourselves in Torah. Thank God also that we finally can let this happen. My notes are that this conversation was supposed to take place in February. So we're there. We're there.
May I do my poem?
It's not anyone's fault. It's the way of the world.
Rabbi David wants to do his poem.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sure, David, please.
Okay, thank you. Today's poem will be from William Blake, and it's called To the Evening Star. And it's a poem about the planet Venus. Thou fair-haired angel of the evening, now whilst the sun rests on the mountains, light thy bright torch of love. Thy radiant crown put on and smile upon our evening bed. Smile on our loves. And while thou drawest the blue curtains of the sky, scatter thy silver dew on every flower that shuts its sweet eyes in timely sleep. Let thy west wind sleep on the lake. Speak silence with thy glimmering eyes, and wash them with silver. Soon, full soon, in dust thou withdraw. Then the wolf rages wide, and the lion glares through the dun forest. The fleeces of our flocks are covered with thy sacred dew. Protect them with thine influence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bless you, Ruth Ann, for the sneeze.
Cough.
So, cough. All right. So
it's the allergies.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that as well now. So let's begin with somewhat of a summary. If we go all the way back to when we began this series, we actually, given the introductions and some of the questions, we actually only got through maybe the first 3 or 4 of the commandments, if even that much. But let me go back and reiterate a few of the overriding comments, or what we might call the fundamentals, the operating assumptions that we have about what are called the 10 Commandments. In Hebrew, it's Aseret Hadibrot. It's the 10 statements, or the 10 things, the 10 utterances, if you will. You should remember that these 10 appear twice in the Torah, once in the 20th chapter of the book of Exodus. That's directly as the narrator would recount the experience. Moses goes to the top of the mountain, and God gives the 10 Commandments on 2 tablets of stone. And then you remember what happened as Moses comes back down, and he sees the people have created the golden calf, and he breaks the tablets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, goes back up to the top of the mountain and pleads with God to forgive the people. And we go through the process again in the narration. That's in the book of Exodus. In the book of Deuteronomy, at the end of the Torah, where Moses is giving his farewell address, and he's giving his, pardon the expression, revisionist history, or he's giving his interpretation of what happened, because the people who are listening to this oration is now a whole new generation. And there are only 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, who were also still at Mount Sinai to remember the experience. So now he's more of a teacher, and he's giving what they call the Mishneh Torah, the second Torah, or repetition of the Torah. And anytime, we all know from our own experience, anytime that you try to repeat, or try to recount or tell the story of what happened, in this case, 40 years ago, his memory is a little, as ours might be, after that many years. And so there are some changes. Some of them may be minor, some of them may be very significant in the way that Moses quotes what happened at Mount Sinai. And so the second version, if you will, of these Aseret HaDibrot, these 10 statements, occur in the 5th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy. And again, we'll for today's shiur, for today's lesson, we'll focus on the Deuteronomy text. So if you have a Bible or a Torah in there available for you, it's Deuteronomy chapter 5, and it begins on verse 6. So some of the differences between the two, between the Exodus and between the Deuteronomy, are understandable. As I said, in the context of Moses might have unintentionally just changed some words or changed the ordering a little bit, or 40 years later, a whole generation later, there might be different nuances in the Hebrew language. There might be different idioms that are used. So he might have meant something a little bit different as he remembered. Basically, whether it's the first or the second version of these 10 utterances, Jewish tradition doesn't divide them 5 and 5. Okay, usually when we see a depiction of the 10 commandments of the 2 tablets, we see, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. We see 5 on the one, and then Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud on the other, 5 and 5. But Jewish tradition divides them up 1 through 4, and then number 5 stands by itself, and then 6 through 10 are considered a little bit differently. 1 through 4 specifically relate to our relationship, sorry for the redundant words there, our relationship to God. The Hebrew is Bein Adam Lamakom, between man or humanity, human beings, and God. And then the last 5 are Bein Adam Lachavero, between each human being and his or her contemporaries, peers, friends, other individuals, other people. Number 5 stands by itself, and 2 reasons. And again, this could be a whole hour's discussion right now of honor your father and your mother. A classic interpretation is when we show our honor and obedience to our parents, by extension, we're showing the same honor and obedience to God, because God placed them as our mother and father, as our role models, as our teachers, especially. And then number 5, Mike, I'll be with you in a second. And then number 5, also honor your father and your mother, is the only one that has a direct reward associated with it, as in the wording of the 10 Commandments. That's not how Jewish tradition has understood it, but maybe that's the way Moses understood it. Was the best way to guarantee your own immortality was to honor father and mother. Therefore, or thereby, your days will be lengthened on the land which Adonai your God is giving to you. Okay, so that's how Jewish tradition divides them up. 1 through 4, 5 stands by itself, then 6 through 10. A final comment on this is, in Jewish tradition, they're not really identified as being any more important than the other 603 mitzvot. Each mitzvah has its own significance. Some of them may have more relevance to us. Some of them may be totally irrelevant. Some of them may be impossible for the average man or woman or Israelite to even think of trying to fulfill that particular mitzvah. So Jewish tradition really talks more, not the biblical tradition, but Jewish tradition really talks more in terms of the what they call the Taryag, the 613 mitzvot, rather than identifying or focusing only on these 10. Okay, I'll stop for a minute. Michael, you had a comment or a question.
Yeah. Now, honor thy father and mother. Is that my parents had passed away, so I continue to talk. When I mention them, it comes up. I have to honor them in a way that they have taken care of me and my brothers. Okay, but
Right.
Is that appropriate in life and death?
Is that appropriate? Oh, absolutely. I mean, the obvious one is by saying Kaddish for them.
Right.
You
Okay.
know, and visiting the graves. But there's one, I forget, it's not Maimonides, but one of the rabbis says, and the ultimate way of demonstrating honor your mother and your father is by naming a child or a grandchild after them.
And also, I think giving tzedakah in their name.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You're supposed to give tzedakah every time that you make any kind of a prayer or whatever. Oh, okay. What I want to do, because we didn't get a chance to do it the first time, is I want to read for you three of the most famous. One of them is long, the others are not. Three of the most famous midrashim, or little, legend and lore of exactly what happened at Mount Sinai, here under the category of what they call the giving of Torah. So pardon my reading here, and I'll run through it quickly. The first one is amazingly relevant. Rabbi Isaac said, Israel was worthy of receiving the Torah immediately upon leaving Egypt. But the Holy One, God said, because of their slavery in clay and bricks, my children's look of good health has not yet come back. Therefore, they cannot receive the Torah at once, because the Torah being pure and clean, but the Israelites are still dirty and impure from their years of servitude. God's delay in giving the Torah may be illustrated by the parable of a king's son who had just gotten up from his sickbed. The tutor said, it's time for your son to go back to school. The king replied, my son's look of good health has not yet come back. Yet you say, let him go back to school? Let my son be indulged for several months with good food, with good drink, so that he may fully recover. Then he can go back to school. Okay. Likewise, God, the Holy One, said, my children's look of good health has not yet come back after their slavery. They have just been released from slaving with clay and bricks. Shall I now give them my pure, clean Torah? Let my children be indulged for 2 or 3 months with manna, with waters of the well, with quail, and then I'll give them the Torah. That doesn't say anything about masks, but there's an interesting lesson there. Okay, this is the long one, and this is a famous one also. The Lord came unto Sinai, having first risen at Seir unto the people thereof, then having shined forth at Mount Paran. And he came into the nations holy, at his right hand of fiery law for them. That's a quote from later on in Deuteronomy. When he who is everywhere revealed himself to give the Torah to Israel, he revealed himself not only to Israel, but to all the other nations as well. At first, God went to the children of Esau. He asked them, will you accept the Torah? And they said right to his face, what is written in it? He said, thou shalt not murder. They replied, Master of the universe, this goes against our grain. Our father, whose hands are the hands of Esau, led us to rely only on the sword, because his father told him, by thy sword shalt thou live, so we cannot accept the Torah. Then God went to the children of Ammon and Moab and asked them, will you accept the Torah? They said right to his face, what's written in it? He said, thou shalt not commit adultery. They replied, Master of the universe, our very origin is in adultery. For the Bible says, thus were both the daughters of Lot with child by their father. We can't accept the Torah. We cannot accept the Torah. Then God went to the children of Ishmael He asked them, will you accept the Torah? They said right to his face, what's written in it? He said, thou shalt not steal. They replied, Master of the universe, it is our very nature to live off of what only is stolen and what is gotten by assault. Of our forebear Ishmael, it is written, he shall be a wild ass of a man. His hand shall be against every man's hand against him. So we cannot accept the Torah. There wasn't a single nation among all the nations to whom God did not go, to whom God did not speak, and as it were, to knock on their door, asking whether it would be willing to accept the Torah. At long last, God came to Israel. They said, and he said, will you accept the Torah? They said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, we will hearken. Of God's successive attempts to give the Torah, it's written, the Lord came into Sinai, having first risen at Sinai, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so Israel is finally receives the Torah. Yes, there are later interpretations, even to the present day, of that the conversation was more like, well, God said, will you accept the Torah? And the Israelites said, how much will it cost? And God said, no, it's free as far as money is concerned, but that's one. And the other, and then they said, oh, well, if it's free, we'll take 10. So there's that one. Anyway, I won't go into all. And then the last one is of course quoted not only in Jewish literature but in non-Jewish literature as well. And it's based off the quote from the Exodus experience, and it says "V'ya'amod tachat hahar," that they stood under the mountain, meaning at the base of the mountain. But the literal Hebrew is they stood under the mountain. So Rabbi Avdimi Bar Hama said the verse implies that God the Holy One overturned the mountain on top of them like an inverted cask and said to them, if you accept the Torah, it is well. But if not, I'll drop it and your grave will be right here. Okay. All different ways of understanding that experience. So let's go to let's try to get through some of these, and then if we need to, we can come back if there are other questions. Numbers 1 through 4. I mean, statements or commandments, if you will, 1 through 4. Again, beginning in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 6. It is the introduction. 1 through 4, as we talked about, were unique statements. I'll use the word statement. Were unique statements to the Israelite nation. These were examples that, as Moses taught it, that distinguished the Israelites from other people. We have one God. This is the God who has demonstrated his choice of Israel, of the people Israel, and brought them out through miracles and wonders and signs. And then after 1 through 4, when God said, what I'm asking you, especially in our relationship, is that you not make any other idols, you not make any graven images, you not worship them, do not bow down to them, and do not take my name in vain. We may come back to that last phrase, but that's what God expects of us in our relationship to God. Of course, the question is: are those identified specifically because they're easy or because they're difficult? That's one thing. The first verse, according to Jewish tradition, the I am the Lord, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I am the Lord your God, is not seen as a commandment. Christian tradition sees it as a commandment, but Jewish tradition does not. It's more of an introductory overriding clause, self-presentation if you will. And that kind of thing is common in the biblical scholars would tell us is very common in inscriptions and edicts that were promulgated by royalty. You know, this is the statement of Hezekiah, the king who rules and conquered such and such and such and such, colon, okay? Not Marty Cohn's kind of colon, but the grammatical colon, all right? And then everything that follows. We did talk a little bit about take the name of the Lord your God in vain last time, so I'm going to skip that for now. We'll come back to it. We did mention about honor your father and your mother, and also the about the Shabbat, observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. The rationale is different. Okay, in Exodus, the rationale was because remember the Sabbath day because God created the world on the seventh day. Now, this is now in the context of coming out of Egypt, and you are now free rather than in slavery, and you and your household and your slaves and your beasts of burden are all entitled to a day off. There was a new institution in the history of commerce, I guess, if you will. Immediately after those, we get into what are simply identified, with in Hebrew, it's only 2 words for the next 3, and then it's still also for 6, 7, and 8 are very quick statements, probably because they were very obvious. And didn't need a lot of explanation, didn't need a rationale attached to them, but they're certainly open to our discussion. And here I know that Michael is going to want to get in this because in respect to Michael Gervan, he was the one who asked initially, I guess more than a year ago, can we have a more extended conversation about the 10 Commandments? So there's do not, lo tirtzach is do not murder, do not commit murder. Then lo tinaf is usually translated as do not commit adultery. But in the teaching of my rabbi, whom I quote frequently, when we studied it, he said, I'd rather see it as a positive statement rather than a negative. So he would have us translate the Hebrew lo tinaf as do not debase yourself what was the phrase? It actually started in the positive. Guard the purity of your family life so that you do not debase that relationship or the holiness of that relationship. That's the way that but we'll talk a little bit more about what adultery actually meant. And then do not steal. And there are pages after pages after pages of exactly what is robbery, what is theft, what is cheating. All of those come again, whereas the words here may be very frank, blunt, concise, and succinct, the interpretations in our own life experiences tell us otherwise, that it's much more of a gray area than black and white. And then the do not bear false witness against your neighbor. Again, it seems relatively clear, but there's a lot of discussion and debate about it. And then the final one it's a different verb in Exodus and a different verb in Deuteronomy. It's covet in Exodus, and it's desire in Deuteronomy. So we'll talk about that also. So without any further ado, after a half an hour of introduction, we'll go back to the do not, do not murder, I guess, do not commit murder. And again, let me invite Michael, because I know this is one that means a lot to you, because you've asked me about it on several occasions. So if you want to give an opening statement on how you respond to people frequently mistranslating or misunderstanding that commandment, Michael, I give you the floor. But you're muted, so.
He doesn't know he's muted.
Michael, you're muted.
Michael,
You're muted.
Muted.
Ah, right, okay. So thanks, Rabbi. Not that eloquent about this, but the fact is, in the non-Hebrew or in the Christian religion, it's thou shalt not kill. Now, that's very, it's a decent. I find that to be a decent way of stating it, but it's not accurate. That's just the way it is, and also demonstrates the quality or the depth of the Hebrew of the Torah, how deep it goes. It's not surface based; it's very deep. And just one final thought about this: I find that there's a connection, a very deep connection with "thou shalt not steal" and "thou shalt not murder," and that is. When you commit murder, you have stolen somebody's life. That's how I take a look at that, and that's why I find I may find myself that stealing might be the most powerful of the 10 commandments. Might be, it's debatable. That's how you look at it and how you see it. But stealing. For another example, if you keep somebody in captivity, if you commit take someone's put somebody in prison that doesn't really belong there, or does, you have stolen somebody's right to move around, and I can't get the words right. I just forget. My mind doesn't work right, but. And that's all I really wanted to say, basically. And thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Sure. You're correct in that many traditions translate this or mistranslate this as "you shall not kill," "thou shalt not kill." It is not. That's a totally different word, and it would make no sense whatsoever coming in context. I know it's several years away before the Torah study class on Saturdays gets to Deuteronomy, but as we encountered over the last several weeks of reading the Torah portion, Moses is very clear in describing, validating, serving in battle and soldiers having to kill in battle, if not even being commanded to kill in battle for the sake of protecting their family, protecting their home, protecting their land. There are different levels of warfare. There's recognition, as I say, almost the validation that killing is going to happen. It's not the mistranslation might sometimes be used by pacifists, but again, that's a whole other context of literature and philosophy, if you will. It's not murder, and Michael is also correct in connecting it to stealing, because when you murder, there's some familiar phrases, some of which I'm sure we're going to encounter on the High Holy Days that are coming up soon. One who protects or saves a single life is credited in Jewish tradition as if he or she has saved the entire world. And similarly, the converse of that, is it the converse or the obverse? But the converse of that is that someone who destroys one life, one single life, it's as if she has destroyed the entire world. And that doesn't mean, as Michael was saying, that doesn't mean just a physical death. That can mean a spiritual death. That can mean a removal or changing of someone's reputation. It can mean in addition to stealing their possession or their resources. It can be so destructive to an individual, to a victim, that the victim has to change their entire lifestyle and become a criminal or become a pauper or whatever it might be, and that's the same. That's judged the same by God and the heavenly court. That's judged the same as if one had committed murder. So I think you're right in many senses that the two of them are linked together. The rabbis will frequently talk about that murder is not only the physical body that is destroyed, but also the reputation. They talk of a shem tov, of a good name, of your reputation, and hence they go into conversations and warnings about gossip and the evil tongue, lashon hara, and things like that. So okay, anyone else want to jump into the conversation, whether we're linking "thou shalt not murder" and "thou shalt not steal" together? I have some other questions that I'll throw out, but let me ask any of you also. Go ahead, Marty, please.
I'm amazed that the authors or God lumped all of these together in one verse. And I think that is why it stimulates our thinking along the lines that you expressed. So I just think that in and of itself says a lot. It's just not enumerated 1, 2, 3, 4. These are all lumped together, what you were talking about.
Mm-hmm. Now, why, however, in that lumping together, why is adultery in between murder and stealing? Is there a thematic connection?
Well, yeah.
Say it, raise your hand. Well, Sue was going to say something, and then I will.
Go ahead.
Ladies first.
No, I was going to say there is a connection spiritually, certainly, that there is a stain on the soul of the one who commits adultery, in the sense that he's as you pointed out, violated the purity and the sanctity of the marriage or relationship he was in or is in. And one could make the statement that it is forever altered by that act to a place, or it's relegated to a place of, you might say, sin or corruption, or whatever term you want to put in there. So there is a connection because all of those conditions imply a state that's of less worth of the individual, because he has become tainted by the act, by an act.
The self.
Yes.
The self.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
And notice, to follow up on that again, in the grammatical sense, if you will, all of these are in the singular.
Right.
They're singular expression. It's not plural.
Right.
This is you, whether you are committing this or whether you are refraining from committing this. It's an individual act. You're not allowed. You can't blame anybody else.
Right. And apropos of that, it's an individual choice.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Decision.
Very good.
Mhm.
And choice. Right. Which again, especially in Deuteronomy, as we will see over the next few weeks, it is, I refer to it as Moses's, as the parallel in Moses's speech to Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream." Okay, Moses keeps on coming back to, I place all these things before you. It's your choice. Choose life, choose good, choose, it's choose blessing over curse, whatever it is. And that's his oratorical model. King's was "I Have a Dream." Moses is "Shema Yisrael." Listen to Israel. This is what you need to understand. Okay, this is who we are. Marty, did you want to say something after Sue, or
I'm going to let Gail go ahead
Yeah.
first.
Okay, all right.
I was just going to comment that I find it interesting that adultery is framed by murder. So you've murdered the relationship
Mhm.
Yes,
and you have stolen the trust
yes,
Good.
excellent,
Exactly.
good
in the
point.
relationship. So that's why it's kind of framed, I would say.
Good.
It is.
And there, another one is that the temptation, and again, we're getting into the desire or the coveting at the end of it, but the temptation is that to commit adultery, you might be tempted to kill or murder the husband
Sure.
first, and then not only steal his wife, but steal everything that comes with her. And,
Sure.
there's that link too. Michael, I think you had a hand up.
I think Marty was first.
Oh, okay, Marty, sure.
Go ahead, Michael. You go ahead.
Okay, well, I think as I was listening to Sue's comments and the operative word that I would focus on is the word marriage. When she mentioned the word marriage, and marriage is you're taking godly vows. And so that's where I see the real strong connection is when you take these godly vows in marriage, that sets everything in its place where adultery shall never be tolerated.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, Marty, you want to come back with your comments now?
Well, I also find it very interesting. Those of us that have maybe studied some aspects of sociology realize that for a society to exist, it is all the weight of that is on each and every individual and their behavior. And each one of these are also indirectly involved as that if you commit any of these, not only are you debasing yourself, but you are that it has the potential to destroy your family, your friends, and the community at large. Because
even a single individual act.
yes. And
Right.
so this becomes, I think there's more to it, even though it's directed to the individual. I think the implication here is that you have a responsibility, not just to yourself, but to, and to me, but to all of those with you, all your entire community. And I think this is where the 10 Commandments, we tend to say, oh, this is for the community, this is for us. No, it's for everyone. It's not just, it's not just between God and me. It is in some ways. But if I don't adhere to it, I'm going to hurt everyone else that I come in contact with.
I go back to the kind of the joking thing that I was saying before, and about where you put a colon in this, and that the thou shalt not murder. And here are two other examples of more than physically murder, taking up a knife or a sword or a gun, whatever. That murder can also be the act of adultery. Oh, hello, little kitty cat. That wasn't so little, kitty cat. Murder can also be, as we were saying, it can be an attack on the ritual, the purity and the sanctity of a relationship. It can also be stealing someone's reputation as well as their possessions. Right. Okay. Anyone else? All right. Unfortunately, I have to take this sidebar, this digression, if you will. In the Torah and in rabbinic literature, until only a little more than 1,000 years ago, lo tinaf, thou shalt not commit adultery, was understood really in Jewish law and halacha one way. And that was, I'm going to give you the quote, voluntary sexual relations between a married or betrothed woman and a man who is not her husband.
Just a woman.
Okay.
Fascinating. Yeah.
All right.
Uh-huh.
Voluntary sexual relations between a married or betrothed woman and a man who is not her husband.
Which answers
Gail.
the question, who wrote the Bible? So-
Right.
Oh,
Right.
my.
Okay. All right. And not only who wrote the Bible, but in what context, and what was the general understanding of society, as Marty was saying, and it goes so much against where our minds are at these days, fortunately. So in other words, lo tinaf, thou shalt not commit adultery, would be understood
Uh-huh.
in at least two different ways, by a man who is already married, by a man who is single, not married, or by a man, and those even have interesting subcategories, and then by a woman who is either betrothed or married. Now, again, you need to remember that for I guess what we would say for defensive purposes, betrothal was a legal status for a woman even before she became married.
Right.
Okay, and that's a whole other discussion of why that was the case, but she was protected in that sense by being promised to somebody else. Sue will be with you in one sec. So she was promised for that. So she could only be guilty of adultery if she had sexual relations with a man who was not her husband. The man is kind of off the hook,
Yeah.
whether he's married or single,
Mhm.
if he has sexual relations with a woman who is neither betrothed or married, because that act of sexual relations can indeed make them married in a legal sense. So it's not a matter of is the man married or single,
Mhm.
because it was a polygamous society. You could have more than one wife. It's all defined by whether she was married or already promised, already betrothed. Whether she participated, this may be what Sue was going to ask about, whether she participated in the betrothal or whether it was a promised betrothal family to family. Okay. All right, Sue.
Yeah, I was just going to say, given the original interpretation of adultery, we have to put ourselves in the mindset of a tribalist society. And
Right.
in those days, tracking lineage was of utmost importance for a variety of reasons.
Mhm.
Hence, the more one-sided, lopsided interpretation of adultery.
Because they needed to know paternity.
Yes,
Right.
yes. I think that's the sum and substance of it. Fortunately, we've evolved considerably since the time that this was originally written.
Right. And, I picture, whether it's for this or for one or the other of the statements that we'll be looking at, I picture these women coming up to Moses and saying, "Boy, did you get this one wrong?" Listen, you put us in this awkward position and da 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 da, whatever. Okay, all right. And it takes, literally, until around 1,000 years ago, 1,100 years ago, to have this changed
Yes.
in Jewish practice. Gail, yeah.
What caused the change to come about?
It's the
What
most-
happened? Was there an event or something 1,000 years ago that said,
Well-
wait a minute, we need to look at this again?
I'd like to think it was just generational and societal pressure on the rabbis. Exactly what's happening now in our generation of, whether it's accepting women rabbis, whether it's, accepting women in the minyan, whether it's accepting same-sex marriages, whether, the society is going to the tradition and saying, we don't want to leave our faith, we don't want to leave our community, but this is who we are, and this is what it means. How can we I hate to use the word because I mean it as a positive verb, how can we reform, as has been done so many times before in Jewish tradition, even within Orthodoxy? How can we reform and readapt the traditional practices so that it better reflects who we are in this day and age, so that we don't have to feel excluded? We want to be included, not excluded.
Okay.
But no, I guess the best answer that I can give to you, Gail, is that Jewish law, especially in the Middle Ages,
Okay.
and then continuing, although most of us are not as familiar with the material, but continuing even up to the present day, is case law. Okay, here's a specific case that is brought to a rabbi, a group of rabbis, a Beit Din, a rabbinic authority, I would call it today like a conclave or a conference or a convention, and a decision is made. It's usually a very controversial one,
Mhm.
and it takes several generations, if not several centuries, for it to be accepted as the norm. So my guess is, I don't know the answer specifically. My guess is that the question had been raised so much about this adultery issue, about polygamy, that that individual rabbis were all kind of sending letters to the most famous rabbis of the times, until one who had enough authority across all the lands of Europe and across the Ashkenazi rather than the Sephardi, or Sephardi rather than Ashkenazi world, to say, okay, here I am issuing what's called a takana, which interesting, remember the word tikkun, like from tikkun olam, that's to correct the world or improve the world. Takana comes from the same thing. So you might translate it as a reform, but it's really an improvement on a law or a practice or a minhag that the generations and now the rabbis have decided is no longer valid.
I would like to see someone who does Judaic studies take this on and write a book about this movement at that particular period of time. It would be really interesting.
It probably exists. I'm not familiar with it, but it's like you say, it's a real milestone.
Mhm.
The rabbi whom everybody refers to with the end of polygamy is Rabbeinu Gershom. But that's for the Ashkenazi. The Sephardim didn't really accept his, and it may have just been political. Well, if the Democrat says this and I'm a Republican, I'm not going to accept it.
Right.
So we have some of those also. but there's big issues, and even the new Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, who's a practicing Orthodox Jew, even he's getting involved. They're trying to address the question of what's called in Jewish law the agunah, the bound woman, one whose husband or ex-husband won't give her a get,
Oh,
or one that whose death was never fully witnessed, and so she's bound. She can't get married, remarried a second time. She can civilly, but not religiously. And Naftali Bennett has even said, from his point of view, that's something that the Israeli Jewish society has to deal with.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, anything else with this issue? As again, as we said, people are correct in pointing it out that historically and culturally, it was most important to know who of the father's children, especially who the father's sons would get the birthright, would inherit, would have the what we say in Yiddish, would have the yichus, right? Would have the special notoriety of being the direct descendant. And then that changes also, and another example of it, of how it changes from following the father into following the mother in matrilineal descent, as to whether or not the child was considered a member of the community, or was considered a mamzer, which is incorrectly translated as a bastard or illegitimate. It's not a mamzer is not an illegitimate child. A mamzer is a child of a forbidden or illicit relationship, and hence does not have a tribal identity. The child is Jewish, is an Israelite, but is not like, it can't be a Kohen or a Levi or descended from any particular tribe. It's just part of the people. So anyone who talks about a mamzer as being an illegitimate child, it's not illegitimate. That's not the Jewish way of thinking. Okay, we'll move on. Number 9. What was the thing? A number 9? Who was the comedian who did something with something? Number 9? Number 9? Anybody remember
It
this?
was the Beatles,
It was the what?
Let's see how it's worded.
the Beatles song, Revolution 9.
Oh, it was Revolution. Ah, okay. You say you want a revolution. Okay. So I don't know if any of you have Bible translations in front of you, but how would you translate? I guess it's the end of verse 17, Deuteronomy 5:17. My translation says, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." Does anyone have anything that's significantly different?
This,
Let me see.
Gail, are you with a Friedman?
I have testify
You shall not testify?
against your neighbor as a false witness, which
Aha,
you think like
okay.
a court setting or something.
right.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Anyone else have anything that leads us in a different direction?
not really.
Same thing.
Okay, the general
Just-
understanding, not only historically, traditionally, but in present scholarship, is that this was referring to court procedure.
Ah,
Okay,
that makes sense.
it's as opposed to so what's the most important part of the commandment, if you will, or of the statement? Is it something that you're doing against your neighbor? Is it relationship in your neighbor, or is the most important is warning you against false testimony, giving false accusations? Okay, and that's the bulk of Jewish tradition says we should interpret this. Okay, because you have a responsibility, going back to another famous phrase, "V'ahavta l'reacha," you should love your neighbor. And in order to love your neighbor, you have to be true to yourself. You have to love and have self-esteem. Therefore, a reminder: you shouldn't offer any false testimony, because that impacts your relationship with your neighbor. Okay, Sue, did you put a hand up?
Yes. I agree that that's probably the intent of that statement, but I think also, what does it do to your future credibility and worth if you bear false witness?
So that's two different things: your credibility and your self-worth. That's
Yes.
two different things.
Yes.
Mhm.
And I suspect if you have a conscience, I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but I think if you have a conscience and you have borne false witness, it comes back to haunt you. If you have a conscience and you live
Yeah.
by this set of statements, I think it's going to come back and really wear away at you
Yes.
for having done that. But it presupposes that you do have a conscience.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Marty, please.
I have to raise a question. What about that little white lie? You don't want to embarrass someone by saying, "Do I look ugly in this dress?" I mean, that's a loaded question. If you
Well,
say,
it's only, in this
Yeah.
case, I guess it's only if you're being asked that in a courtroom.
You're off the
maybe,
hook.
Right,
maybe
if
that's
you're
why.
being
maybe
asked on a
that's
first
why it's
date, I
just
don't
in
know,
the
but,
courtroom.
Yeah,
Right.
you're off
But-
the hook if you.
But it poses
Uh,
some difficulties, because
Sure.
then do you need 2 white lies to cover the first and 3 to cover the second, and so forth? You can see where it can lead to. So even there, that you can have an endless debate about, okay, where does this end?
Yeah.
Mhm.
But Marty, what's the reason to white lie? Why do we tell white lies?
It's to spare the other person.
Sometimes.
Yes.
Quite frequently, you
Right.
don't want to do it. Also, if an example of this was in one of the philosophy classes about somebody comes to your home, knocks on the door and says, "Please hide me. Somebody is chasing after me and will kill me." And you say to that person, "Go hide in the closet." And then the next event is that there's a knock on the door, and somebody is there who says, "Is that person here now? I'm looking for this person. Is he here now?" And you say, if you don't want to lie, the person's going to be dead. And if you can tell the truth and the person that you're hiding will be dead, or you can reinterpret the question. That person really isn't in my doorway. He is not here now.
Mhm.
You have not lied. Okay.
Unless they ask, is the person in your house?
In the house. That's right. And then it's also, the lying is in the mind of the person who hears what you say,
Sometimes.
because you walk away with the wrong interpretation. And you say, and in retrospect, you say, "I should have asked him, was he here in the house?" Okay, I interpreted the question incorrectly. And so it becomes an interesting, lengthy debate. I don't know what the right answer is, but you can see how this can, you can argue each one of these interpretations.
Let me pick up on, well, go ahead, Sue and Gary, then I'll pick up.
To Gail's point, I think she was getting after something a little different.
Yeah.
Because a white lie can be self-serving.
Mhm.
to endear you and ingratiate you in the eyes of the
Yes.
person for whom you expressed a white lie. So that there's that dimension too. But as you point out, this whole thing was designed, I think, around legal instances more than it was human to human. And yet there is always that underlying message to us in our readings that we owe it to people to be forthright. We owe it to ourselves to be forthright. But as we are famous for doing, we always get involved in hair splitting because there are so many instances in which it might be as a life-saving device to not tell the truth. It might spare someone a terrible indignity to not tell the truth
Mhm.
if you're taking it outside the courtroom.
Sure.
Inside the courtroom, let's assume that you don't have enough evidence to convict a heinous criminal. And by your telling a lie, you get him convicted. You might feel a little sense of glory there in having crossed the line to get the guy convicted when you know he's committed an atrocity and there's no hard evidence. I mean, this is where I think we Jews are famous for hair splitting and coming up with so many different ways of looking at the same situation,
Mhm.
which actually makes me very proud of where I come from, because I think the Jewish tradition of doing this is magnificent and often produces many new ideas on how to approach something, which are still moral.
And I'm not an attorney or trained in the procedure, but I don't think in the courtroom you're allowed to answer a question with a question,
That's right.
That's true.
which is part of our hair splitting tradition.
Yes, we're famous for that too.
Right. Gary, you wanted to pipe in with something?
Yeah, no, I was just saying this conversation was taking me back to my undergraduate school. We had especially plebes, new freshman year cadets were invited over to homes for dinners a lot and allowed to go out on post. But the cadet hostess who was responsible for our social skills and development, and which work to pick up, and which got faced with this all the time. And when I went back a second time on the faculty for a while, the hostess department worked for me. And because the young cadets, you know, they had their honor system, and you won't lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. And they came up with that a lot to the hostesses. What do I do when the dinner was not bad, not good? You know, what did I? I'm expected to say thank you, and this was a lovely dinner. And that it goes back to where we kind of started about it. So it's about, you know, not hurting, not causing harm, hurt to other people. And it was considered a social, they call it the category social lies, but it was to protect the family that just spent a time putting on a nice dinner for you, but maybe it wasn't good for you, or maybe it was something you didn't eat, but you were expected to eat it, and compliment the hostess on it. But I think what Sue just went over to was a really interesting clause. But yeah.
Okay, Gail, then I want to come back with something.
I was just going to say, yeah, I what Gary just said about harm. I think the purpose of white lie is not to cause unnecessary harm.
Yeah.
That's really the bottom line.
Good. Michael?
Yeah, thank you. According to the word conscience, everyone has a conscience. It's about strength of the conscience. People have a strong conscience, and people have sometimes a very weak one.
Uh-huh. Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah,
Yes.
okay. David,
Yes, I wanted to pick up on something that Michael said much earlier in our session today. And that was about the fact that it might not have been necessary to have the commandment, thou shalt not kill, when you're stealing somebody's life. And I think it's that the Jewish tradition says that each commandment, they are all equally important.
true.
And I just wanted to add that. But the other thing is that in my reading of verse 17, they have all of these these four commandments in one verse. You shall
Exactly.
not murder, neither shalt thou commit adultery, neither shalt thou steal, neither shalt thou bear false witness
Mhm.
against thy neighbor. It's.
The neither is really just and.
Yeah.
And-
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
Right.
but they're all kind of stitched together there.
Yes.
For a very important verse.
Right.
That's all I
Okay.
have to add.
I want to go back to where I was asking about if anyone has a different translation, especially in here of the end of verse 17. After, as David was saying, after the neither shalt thou not what? What's the phrasing? Because the classical commentators, and I found three of them, focus on a different part of the phrase as being the most important operative command. In other words, okay, the verb is to answer or to respond. That's the negative. Okay, velota anevareacha eid shakir. Okay, don't answer about your neighbor, or it's not to your neighbor. Don't answer about your neighbor with false testimony. So there's an assumption that, it's back to the white lie thing that Marty was talking about. There's the assumption that you've been asked or that you've been put in a position of having to make a decision
Right.
of how to respond. So I'll give you three different classical commentaries. One is when you answer inappropriately, then you become a false witness. Okay, all right. And the second one is because it's written in the negative. Do not answer the urge to be a false witness,
Mhm.
even if it comes from your neighbor.
Mhm.
Okay, your neighbor may be asking you to give false testimony.
Right.
Okay, and do not answer that urge or that call. And then finally, the most famous of the commentators of the ones that I found for here is Ibn Ezra, is do not testify. Don't put yourself in the position of having to testify if you're a false witness. Okay, in other words, if you're asked to be a witness for the prosecution, but don't put yourself in that position of having to perjure yourself in court.
And
Yeah, Ruth Ann.
I was just gonna say, that's what my translation says, perjurous.
Aha.
Urges, that's
Okay, good.
interesting.
Right. That's a whole different, approach than the way that most people think about that commandment. All right. Okay. Anything else on 9, Marty? I kind of cut you off before, but
The only thing that I would like to say about what we're involved in reading is, in my mind, God's recognized He's given us freedom of choice.
well, yeah. Again,
Yeah.
and here's
I mean,
that's what Moses, the teacher,
Yeah.
Moshe Rabbeinu, was really emphasizing here. All of these are individual choices, and Yom Kippur especially tells us, underline the individual. Each of us chooses. Don't go along with the peer pressure. Don't go along with the majority. Make your own decision. Right. Gail?
Isn't it interesting that when you go to be in the witness stand, you have to affirm this very same commandment?
Yes,
yes.
I mean,
that's true.
Mhm.
front and center.
So help you God.
Yes,
Yes.
right.
Right. Okay, just for a few minutes, number 10. And we've pointed out before that Moses changes the verb, and not only changes the verb, but changes the whole context. So I'll summarize it in verse 18. Okay, in Deuteronomy, you shall not, now this translation is you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. And then period. Okay, then you shall not covet or crave or desire your neighbor's house or field or male or female slave or ox or ass or anything that is your neighbor's. In other words, this is the one that I can really picture all the wives coming to Moses and saying, hey, when you're teaching the people about, statement number 10, okay, don't lump wives together with oxen and asses, please. Okay, we're not possessions.
Right.
We're human beings, and that relationship between a husband and wife is different than between the man of the house and the slave. Is different than the man of the house and the beast of burden. And whatever, you need to somehow emphasize that. We're trusting you, Moses. Come on, do it right. And so there's a change in the verb. Coveting in Exodus. Well, no, I won't say it. I won't say it in Exodus, but because the word is in both. But coveting seems to imply that you're closer to an action as a response of that emotion. Okay, that you might be pressuring yourself to take out. Think of King David, and Bathsheba and whatever. So that's coveting, but just desiring it. There's that's a nice car. That's a nice suit. That's a lovely picture. Doesn't mean that I want to take it off, steal it off the wall. So in other words, that one of the commentators even says that coveting might lead to a legitimate action. Okay, I covet that. There's that car. I might approach my neighbor and say, hey, I really like your car. Would you be interested in selling it? That might be a legitimate response to coveting, as opposed to the desiring that might lead you into an illegal or illegitimate approach towards your neighbor. Okay. However, that's Rabbi Roman's interpret of all of this. I'm in the minority. Most of the rabbinic scholars that I was able to look at, most of them said there ain't no difference. They're just the words are synonymous. Okay, so I'll leave it up to you as to whether you see a difference in them or not.
Could it be interpreted as you shall not be jealous?
Well, there's a totally different word for jealous.
Yes,
Envy, it's envy.
yes.
Yeah, and there's a different word. There's a different word for that
Mhm.
also, but that might be the intent. Again, whether however we want to, and any of us want to read this literature, is this verbatim God's choice of language, or is this Moses now only weeks away from his death? He just I have that. Many of us probably do too. I just can't come up with the right word, and unintentionally I say something that has a totally different meaning to the people who are hearing it.
I believe, Rabbi, if I may, in response to Gail, jealousy, I think, is permitted, but envy is not. That's in the Orthodox, I believe. It's not permitted to be envious, I believe.
No, and envy is. It says rather than being envious, be happy for the achievements or the possessions of your neighbor.
Yes.
Right. Sue?
In the Hebrew, what's the Hebrew word for covet? Or that has been
Well, it's lo tachmod. That word is in both Exodus and Deuteronomy.
And does it literally
It's
mean
the
in
second,
English?
it's the second one,
Yes.
which the closest that we would have is it's lo titaveh. The closest that we would have in modern Hebrew, it's a word that doesn't appear a lot in classical Hebrew, but the closest we would, believe it or not, and I'll let anybody who wants to expand on this, is the phrase bon appetit.
Mhm.
Okay, in Hebrew it's b'te'avon. Okay, and it's the same. It's the te'avon is the noun of this verb.
Ah,
So if somebody wants to come up with some kind of have an appetite for, is that what the commandment is? Don't have an appetite for your neighbor's house. I don't know how that fits into any of the other words that we're using, the descriptive words that we're using, whether it's jealousy, whether it's envious, whether it's passionate about, whether it's lustful. But that's the closest. The verb doesn't appear that often in biblical literature. It may have been, one of Moses's favorite words. We just don't know.
interesting.
Okay, times are running. Anything else? I'm glad. Yeah, Michael, go ahead, please.
I don't know. I want to get something in before the end of discussion, before you go.
Sure.
And,
Excuse me 1 second. I gotta have to say goodbye to my wife.
I know.
I'm back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. Before, I don't know how much longer you're going to be speaking, but I just want to get this in because it's important to me. I guess it's important, and and I don't mean to, this is not to change the discussion, please. It's just for something.
Well, if anybody else has anything specifically related to then fine. But otherwise, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about a discussion about the Holocaust in the future. And
Holocaust I mean, discussion about the Holocaust.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
And,
I misunderstood what you were saying there for a minute.
yeah, I just wanted to, and the
I
purpose.
know
is-
we've said we'd like to structure some kind of a study session, open discussion, whatever. And
Yeah,
I would like that to be in person, a face to face
I think that's important.
kind of thing, rather than just
Yes.
online. So,
You
but
mean as a group together?
yes,
Michael, Rabbi, I have to run, and since I'm in control here, can I ask you guys to discuss that privately, between
Sure.
the two of you? And if you're talking about Holocaust, I mean, the only thing I would like to see something is talk about all the Holocausts that have occurred to the Jewish people over the centuries,
all the tragedies.
all the tragedies, because, we
And I would
talk
just say, and how the Holocaust of the 20th century, how that was different, or maybe how it was the epitome of, or whatever.
But my point is different. I want to discuss it is my observation, my strongest position, that a second Jewish Holocaust, has already started. That's what I wanted to talk about.
Okay, all right. Yes, I think we should have that kind of discussion, that kind of session, and not just amongst ourselves, but bring in some people who can have some other scholarly, political, psychological, benefit to us also. So thanks to everybody. Thanks to Ruth Ann for hostessing. And we will hopefully see you Monday night, Tuesday, for Rosh Hashanah. Wishing everybody a happy and sweet new year.